Hi, David.
Hi, Andrea. It's really a pleasure to be here.
It's really a pleasure to have you. And I can't even begin to tell you, and I think I've already told you off air, how excited I am about starting this conversation with you, because it seems like anytime I ask you a question, you tell me something that just makes my mouth drop. So I'm so excited to share you with anybody listening or watching us today. And we'll start off simple. You want to start off simple?
Fantastic. Sure. Sounds great to me.
Okay. All right. So tell us where you were born, or where did you grow up?
Well, okay, that's maybe not so simple, but
I know, because you were just telling me about that.
I was born in Istanbul. My dad was in the U.S. Foreign Service. He was a diplomat. And I spent the first 4 years of my life there, and then he was moved to Vienna. So that's where linguistically I started obviously learning languages, and was bilingual in German and English by the time I was 8 when we left. And then we had a little bit of time in the U.S., and then he was stationed in Costa Rica, in San Jose. So that's when I learned Spanish. And a little more time in the U.S. And then just so that I would have some sort of consistency, not only me, but my siblings, then we were ushered off to boarding schools in the eastern part of the U.S., and he was then stationed in Germany, which was his last place. But I would go over there and visit during vacations and renew my German, and that was great. I was there as a middle teenager, and those are impressionable times, and really, really enjoyed that experience.
Yeah, what a fascinating way to live.
Yeah, it's.
Do you remember Istanbul at all?
Well, I've been back since.
Okay.
And in fact, long after I was married, I guess in my 30s or 40s at some time, I went back and visited the hospital where I had been born. It meant nothing to me at the time, but just to say that I had done it.
I bet. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it is a once in a lifetime kind of thing while you're there. Like, how many times are you going to go back?
That's right. Although, as an adult, then I was much more interested in the history and the pre-Christian history of the place, and all that was involved with that facet of it, and which I had not had any interest in, obviously, when I was 4 years old. So,
of course.
So that was really, really exciting to me.
And so you lived in Vienna from 4 until 8?
Till I was about 4 years, yeah.
So you remember that?
I remember for sure. Yeah.
How many languages are you able to communicate with? How about that?
Okay, that's a really good way to say it. So I am conversant in 5 languages. I speak German reasonably well, and I speak Spanish, Spanish pretty well, and Italian and French. Then I can get around in. So we'll say it that way. So,
that's
and sometimes
impressive.
I speak a little English too. So.
Me too. Sometimes that makes sense.
That's right. That's what we try to do anyway.
Okay. Name something you cannot live without.
Whoa. Contact with God. That absolutely, that's the beginning and the end of it all.
I agree.
So.
Did you grow up religious?
No. Well, let's see. On my dad's side, they were Catholics, so I would faithfully go to Mass when I was visiting my cousins anyway. My mom was Protestant Episcopalian, and we would go to church faithfully at Easter and Christmas, and every once in a while in between. Although she was the one who spearheaded my own passion for spirituality, and for that I am forever grateful to her. But no, it came. So I was a music major in college.
You were?
Yeah, and it was a small college in eastern Indiana where we got our practicum experience taking on church jobs, right? And conducting choirs and forming little orchestras and that kind of thing. And the whole time this was going on was during the Vietnam War. And I remember, well, this was one of those poignant experiences I had, right? When I was married and my son, I guess, was about, maybe he was under 2 still. And he had some bug, nasty, but not in any way life-threatening. You know about kids and that kind of thing. And we had put him in his crib, and my wife and I were watching the news. And in it were always these scenes of what was going on in Vietnam at the time.
Right.
And here was this village just blown to smithereens with just about everybody in it dead, with the exception of 2 or 3 kids who were alive and in shock and sort of moaning. And at that moment, my son, who was not feeling very comfortable, started his own little whimpering. And not 1, but 2 adults, his mother and his father, got up from the TV and went to administer to whatever his needs were. And there was something about the juxtaposition of those 2 moments that said, wait a minute, what I'm hearing in church is there's something missing. Okay, I can understand it if someone who had grown up in this particular religious belief then turned against it, maybe the God or whatever would no longer have anything to do with them. But how about these kids out there who'd never heard of it? And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of the search for me, at least consciously. I know now that I look back that even as a kid, I mean, there were moments when it was there, but that was the beginning of the conscious search for sure. So.
And how did that evolve?
Well, I kept going to the spiritual leaders in the churches where I was where I was employed, and they didn't really have any answers to that, and so I was just shopping around really. And my mother, I'll backtrack a little bit here. Her search began much earlier, when she was in her, well, let's see, when she was finished her creating her family, she wanted a hysterectomy. There were some medical issues that would be improved as a result of that. And so we were living, of course, in the United States at that time near Washington, D.C., so Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. That was the big hospital. And this is a partly shocking story, but also a partly amusing one. So at the time, and probably to this day, Johns Hopkins is really dedicated to training doctors from all over the world.
Yeah.
So she went in for a hysterectomy, a routine thing, and everything went wrong. And she lost, I think, 7 pints of blood. I mean, it was horrible. My dad fainted out in the lobby. And she, of course, was pronounced dead at one point, and she was up on the ceiling watching this whole thing going on, and looked down and said, "Oh my God, how come I didn't notice this before? The doctor's Turkish." He was a young Turk in training. And so somehow they got her revived again and, put her back together. And when she was stable and and back in her room again, the doctor finally came in when she was conscious and greeted her, at which point a total Caucasian, greeted him in Turkish. Well, talk about somebody who nearly had a near-death experience. It was the doctor. He
was shocked.
He was totally shocked. But that was the beginning of her search, her out-of-body, her conscious search. And so she had been doing a lot of reading, and she had been doing a lot of exploring. And so when I came along, then probably 10 years later, now as a young adult, I graduated from college, just trying to figure this whole thing out, and was visiting her, I saw some books lying around, probably very intentionally scattered around the house on her part, and started reading one. And in one of them, it just talked about how, we all go through it all. And there is no discrepancy between, even though it seems like some people are enormously privileged and others are having a horrible time, the fact is it all gets balanced out because everyone does it all. And and I think it made the comment, this is really a schoolhouse. And that's what we're doing down here. And everything just relaxed inside my. Okay.
Finally made sense.
That now finally is the first thing that makes any sense at all to me.
Do you remember what book it was?
Well, it was a takeoff of the Sant Mat teaching in India. I think the first manifestation of it in this country was Path of the Masters. And then one of the students of one of the East of the Indian masters was an American actually named Paul Twitchell, and Paul Twitchell then was the one who had written this book, he wrote several books and I've read them all, and I can't remember which one that was in, except that it just changed my life. So that's where it all started.
No coincidences.
No, none. There's no such thing. Yeah.
Nope, I agree. Yeah. Okay. This continues to unfold. Here we go. What are you watching, reading, or listening to these days?
Number one, I don't watch TV ever.
Me neither.
Sometimes, I can... With exceptions, if there is a DVD or something that is of interest in a topic that I'm interested in, then for sure I'll do that. But in terms of watching, just turning on the TV, that just never happens. And we live at the Oregon coast, and there's not a great deal of entertainment. Well, I mean, there is, but nothing that would particularly
considered entertainment.
Right.
Yeah. Typical entertainment.
Right.
Yeah.
So reading is something that I do voraciously. My wife will tell you that I usually have at least 5 or 6 books going at the same time. And so, I read, and the kinds of things I read. One of the reasons why I have multiple books going is because I want to make sure that I don't wander. I'm perfectly capable of reading a page and then going back and saying, I have no idea what I just read. And so by reading only a couple of pages in each book and then switching to a completely different topic, then I am much more able to just stay focused. And
no way.
Yeah. And
that helps?
Oh, it helps me enormously, because a lot of what I read tends to be, let's see, I don't want to say technical. Well, it is technical in its own way, but it is scholastic, let's put it that way. Even the spiritual books that I read, they tend to be fairly cerebral, and just because you have to get difficult concepts down under the page. And so if I read a book that is of interest to me spiritually, then I don't want to just end up 4 pages later and saying, I have no idea what this guy just said. And so then I'll read a novel, let's say, a few pages of something that's fun and it's light, and then I'm ready to go back and look very carefully at something that's more weightier, let's say. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Huh. I've never tried that
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what am I reading? Well, okay. So right now I'm reading a novel by Charles Dickens, and I'm reading. I've never read any of the Sherlock Holmes, so I have an anthology of Sherlock Holmes, and I'm reading all the. Those are the.
That's so cool.
Those are the fun things that I'm reading. Plus, an author, a really fine writer, but didn't much care for his subjects, so I set him aside. But I was reading, they were short stories. And then in between, I'm going back and reading the works of Paul Twitchell. That has been probably, 30 years since I've read them. And it's just amazing. They're totally different books than what I remember them as being. And I'm reading Path of the Masters again, Julian Johnson. And what
it's
else?
Interesting that I just brought that up, isn't it?
Yeah. 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 And, well, of course, always have something going on about dreams, which is the area of
expertise.
Well, certainly by now, I guess I can say expertise, but certainly of passionate interest. Let's put it that way. So,
definitely a passionate interest of yours. You have many. Mm-hmm. So, would you say that there's anything that you're really interested in or obsessed with recently?
I would say that, of all the things that I don't do very well, number one, yes, God. And it always comes back to that because the rest is all just completely transitory. And that you and I both know. The one thing I don't do very well, maybe because I have a brain that doesn't like to quit, is sit in silence for an hour or 2 hours and be completely still. And so, excuse me, if there were an area where I really would like to improve, it would be in that arena.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Just to sit with my mind completely still. And there's always a zillion things going on. So,
well, you live right at the coast.
Yeah, that helps. That does.
Could help.
It can. And yet, again, if you think of the ocean as the deep, still unconscious or super consciousness, then we're right at the coast where all the waves are crashing. And so there's
I just meant maybe you could sit on the beach and do that.
Yeah, so there's an element of the turmoil there too.
Yes.
And I actually consciously, when I go into meditation, think, okay, now it's time to go beneath the waves, where it's totally still, where it is totally calm, and just observe what's there. So that's a metaphor, but it's a very helpful one. So,
yeah, I think you just brought me into hypnosis.
Good,
right
good, fantastic, good, yeah.
Okay. Tell me something unique or interesting about you that only those close to you would know.
Wow. Boy. Probably the topic that we're on right now.
Okay.
Again, you have to be a little careful. You have to be a little careful who you express this kind of thing to. Not everyone's open to it. Not everyone's even open to dreams, which was a big surprise to me. I thought, this is the bridge. Everyone dreams. This is the bridge between what people consider their objective, normal, scientifically based lives and that which is beyond that,
the unseen,
the unseen, the metaphysical, and it's amazing how resistant some people are even to that. Well, yes, I dream, but I don't remember my dreams, or whatever excuse is offered. But for those who are passionate about it, it's such an exploration. It's such a gratifying experience that. Well, we can certainly talk more about that.
We definitely will. What are you naturally gifted in?
Okay. Certainly woodworking. I am by profession a craftsman.
Yes, you are.
And that certainly I've had really fine training in that arena. And so that is one facet of who I am. But I also get along well with people.
Yeah.
And what's ironic is that, you know, I said I'm a craftsman. My profession was as a violin maker. And once I set off on my own, I was in my shop by myself. And weeks would go by sometimes without contact with anybody but my family. And it's ironic now that I am retired that I've moved to a small community, and my service back to the community is one of civic affairs. And I'm dealing with people all the time, and all of their little contentious issues and all of their little fiefdoms that they want to preserve and support and butt everybody else out of. And it's full of retirees like myself. Many of them have their PhDs and are accustomed to a certain deference being paid to them, even though what they are doing civically may not be anything having at all to do with their area of expertise, but they think they should be treated with the same deference, let's say. And so this has actually been a tremendous school for me. How is it possible to bridge that? How is it possible to bring harmony where there is disharmony? And that has been a whole exploration on my part, taking my dream work to the next level, to an arena in which it's relatively new to me. And it's been successful. And that's been a really a wonderful and fairly astonishing part of this whole adventure. So
when did you start playing music, and what instrument?
My first memory of a lesson was piano lessons when I was about 5 or 6 in Austria. That's because that's where we were living at the time.
You learned to play piano in Austria?
Well, okay. I do not play piano very well. So I was one of those kids who never practiced. And that, well, maybe it was a good thing. What I wanted to learn was violin. And my mother told me, no, you have to learn keyboard first. And then when you get reasonably competent at that, then you can learn violin. And that's pretty much what happened, except that my level of competence in piano is just no more than a beginner's. My wife, who plays beautifully, that's a whole different story. So she's the pianist in the family and encourages me every once in a while to come play duets with her, which I always resist, just simply because, you know, I'm really not very good at it. Then I did learn violin. And there I got reasonably competent, but still never really practiced well enough. And what was really maybe a surprise was the instrument that I ended up being semi-professional in was voice. I ended up as a singer, sang opera, sang in the Los Angeles Master Chorale, sang in the Los Angeles Civic Center Opera Chorus, toured with Roger Wagner, and had a few years where, and in that I felt, okay, I got good at that. And so it ran its course, but that was really the instrument that I excelled in. But mostly I left all the performance anxiety and all the rigmarole and all of the silliness that goes with performing to somebody else, and sat in my shop and made and restored and repaired instruments. And it was much quieter and much easier on on the solar plexus and on the
psyche.
nerves and all the stuff that goes with that. So
wow. You never cease to amaze me. You just keep pulling out all of these not crazy, amazing things that you've accomplished.
It's been a rich life. There's no question about it. So
you're a master. It's amazing.
I don't know about that, but I'm certainly a jack of all trades. Let's put it that
way. Okay. Okay. Well, was music your first love? Were you singing when you were little?
Oh yeah, sang in choirs and got involved in got involved in plays. And and when you're a small kid like that, you any play you're in is going to have some singing in it. That's just the nature of it. But again, it's so shocking in retrospect that this happened, but at the time I thought nothing of it. But I went and I heard that the local children's community theater, I can't even remember what it was called. This is in Annapolis, Maryland. They were doing a play in which the lead was a little Scottish boy. And I thought, well, I can do a Scottish accent. And so I went and tried out. And you have to understand, I had just come from Vienna, and reading English was difficult for me because I was probably a grade level behind everybody else. They handed me this script to read, and I was totally inept, except that I said, okay, well, every time I would figure out a sentence and I would read it normally, and then I would go back now that I understood the sentence, and I would say it again in a Scottish accent. And so, there were probably 150 kids trying out for this part. And I get a call, a day or two later saying that I'd gotten the part. I thought, oh, okay, that's nice. And it never even occurred to me how completely bizarre that was based on the audition that I did, except that I could do this Scottish accent, which clearly none of the 150 other kids bothered to even try. But reading for me was so difficult that finally in the rehearsals, I abandoned it all and just read it and memorized my lines in an American accent until finally the director sat me down and said, the reason you got this part, would you mind going back and doing that again? And I said, oh, okay, sure. So that's what happened. So, so I guess theater was first. And then eventually, theater is great, but it's no way to really make a living. And it's not really much of an avocation because it's so absolutely time consuming and absorbing. If you're in a play, boy, that's all you do. Whereas, you can sing in a choir and you can do musical things. Certainly it takes work. Certainly it takes your attention, but there is room for other things too.
Right.
So,
you can leave it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you already mentioned that you make and play violins.
Right.
When did you begin doing that?
Well, okay. That started, the playing certainly started when I was a kid, when I was 11 or 12. But the making started in college. And as I think I mentioned, I went to a college in eastern Indiana that was in a very small city. And there was no violin maker there. And so it was incumbent on somebody in the music department to take the musical instruments over to the big city of Indianapolis, to the violin maker there, and have them serviced. And so, one time I volunteered and went over there and went into this guy's shop, this violin maker's shop, and that was it. I mean, I was completely smitten at the time. Let's see, there's more to the story. Actually, I was very involved. I mean, I've always been involved in woodworking. That's always been just a hobby and so forth. And my violin professor in college had an old antique clock that was not in very good shape. And I said, well, if you'll let me have that, why I will refinish that and restore it for you. She let me do. And then he said to me, David, there's a freshman who's just come in. She thinks she wants to learn the violin, and I know what's going to happen. She's going to try it for a month or so and then realize just how difficult it all is to start when you're in college. And it's going to be abandoned very soon, and I don't want her investing a lot of her own money in something that will be useless to her down the road. Here's an old clunker of a violin that's been lying around. You know, you fixed my clock, see if you can fix this. So I thought, well, okay. Somebody must have written a book about it. And so I went into the college library, and lo and behold, they had a book on the topic. And I read it, and I said, oh, well, okay. So there's a front, and there's a back, and there's some sides, and there's this scroll. Well, that can't be too hard. And so I fixed this thing up, I'm sure horribly, but I at least got it playable. And that's then when I had the opportunity to take the instruments over to Indianapolis and went into this guy's shop, and that was it. I was smitten. I said, okay, I got to do this. And he had very little time for me at first.
He's like, who is this kid?
Yeah, that's right. You know, another dilettante who thinks he wants to go into this, who has no idea what's involved. But I was persistent. And then again, there are no coincidences, Andrea, as you and I know. And I'm a little bit sad to report, although it was only temporary on his part, that his shop was in the basement of his house. And one day going down the stairs, he tripped and fell and braced his fall with his hands and broke a bone in his wrist and had to be in a cast for 6 weeks. And so he grudgingly looked at me and said, okay, if you want it, now's the time, because I can't work for 6 weeks. And so, I jumped at the chance, and he taught me the rudiments and the beginnings of maintenance of instruments and how to rehair violin bows, and told me what I was in for if I really was going to do this seriously, and that I really needed to go into an apprenticeship if that was going to happen. And that's what happened. So.
Was he your apprentice?
No, I did not apprentice with him. Another series of, I won't go into it all, but another series of fortuitous events, which led me, totally without, there was something guiding. That's the only way to say it. Something guiding me along the path, because I was so oblivious and so naive and so ridiculously out of touch with how all this was falling into place. But I got an apprenticeship in one of the foremost shops in the United States, out in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. Among the violins that I actually worked on was the one belonging to entertainer Jack Benny, and it was a Stradivarius. It was a real one, and it was I had nothing to do with it. It just sort of fell into place, I stayed there 4 years.
Meant to be.
Yeah. Despite myself. I mean, they were pushing me like this, you're supposed to go here. And I was oblivious, just like there's a dumbbell being shoved around, and this all opened up for me. So.
What is the major difference in a Stradivarius as opposed to the usual violin? Is it the sound quality?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit exaggerated, because there are some really extraordinary instruments being made today. But part of it is that there's been a whole lot of research where the makers have gone back. See, what happened was these crafts back in the 17th century, which is when he lived, were all passed down. They were guilds. right? They were crafts guilds, and the knowledge was all passed down in secret verbally. Nothing was ever written down. And then someone would come along and say, oh, gee, there's a lot easier way to do such and such. Well, let's try it this way. And so a generation or two would go by, and the new techniques, which seemed so much easier, were the ones that were incorporated into the method. And then maybe 50 years after this began to happen, someone would say, those older ones, they're holding up a whole lot better, and they're sounding a whole lot better than the newer ones that we're doing. What did they do? And nobody could remember. And so that was how this craziness began, because then the less people knew, the more secretive they became. And that was the state of affairs until, and I'm very proud to say, the United States and the violin makers in this country had a lot to do with it. We are forever curious and forever trying to play catch-up ball with our scientific knowledge, especially when it's an old European custom. And we said, come on, let's open the doors and let's be a little bit logical about this, and let's share our data, and let's do this scientifically and find out what in the blazes they did. And it was actually largely my generation that was able to go back and rediscover a lot of the so-called secrets. They weren't really secrets. They were just forgotten. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So some great instruments are being made now, but no one's ever done it better than he did it. So
it reminds me of The Red Violin, that movie.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
That was a fun movie. That was a good movie.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So you developed an instrument known as the Pellegrina and the Riviola.
Yeah, that's right. And yes, and also a violin called the Maximilian. Yeah, those three. But the Pellegrina definitely is the one that has been the most successful of them. So here's what's been happening to musicians over the decades. It is that composers, there seems to be this need among composers to one-up their predecessors, in the sense of, you made this quite interesting through the technical acrobatics. That's a good word. The technical acrobatics of what you wrote. I can one-up you. I can show you. And what's happened is that the music that is being composed has gotten harder and harder and harder. We're talking classical music now. So when things like the viola, which is my area of expertise, began, all they were intended to do was to play very simple melodies to accompany boy choirs in big cathedrals. That's all they did. They're very simple things to play. And it didn't really matter how big the thing was or how cumbersome it was or, how unwieldy it was to try to play this thing. Well, as the decades went on and more compositions were written and the demands on the player increased, the injuries to players were increasing exponentially to the point now it's epidemic. I mean, the statistic, I believe, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% of professional, well, certainly violists, but string players in general, or maybe it's all professional musicians, I can't remember, will experience a totally debilitating injury sometime in their professional career. And that's appalling. I mean, that's worse than football. And we kind of forget that that playing an instrument really is a sport. I mean, because of the artistry that's involved, we focus on that so much. But, we're not running down a field, but we're using arms and shoulders and hands and fingers and necks to a large extent. And players are just... There are whole orthopedic clinics in the United States devoted exclusively to musicians. That's appalling. That's absolutely unheard of.
It's a lot of practice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hours and hours and hours of holding instruments in orthopedically unhealthy positions.
Which didn't happen when the Stradivarius.
Well, they may have, but they didn't do it for very long,
Yeah.
and they didn't do it.
That's what I mean. They weren't practicing to the extent that they're practicing now.
Nowhere near.
Yeah.
And the music wasn't technically as difficult, so
Right.
they didn't have to. In fact, even so I was talking about the 17th century. Now let's go to the end of the 18th century, 150 years later, and there's this famous remark by the composer Franz Joseph Haydn. When he was writing, he wrote most of his music for his Austro-Hungarian employer, but toward the end of his life, he was in such demand that he began writing things for musicians in England. And there's this famous letter he writes where he sends them a piece of music he wrote. And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, but this is hard enough that you will have to practice it." But I mean, that's amazing that the implication was that the music was easy enough that you could hand it sight unseen to the musicians and that they would play it off the bat without any difficulty at all. And here he was for the first time writing music that needed to be looked over. I mean, this was a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
And so now, yeah, it's gotten to the point where, you practice hours and hours and hours. So this is a long way of saying, yeah, I completely redesigned one of the most offending instruments is the viola. It looks and is played the same as a violin, but it's way too big. It should be played like a cello between the knees. It should not be played up on the shoulder like a violin. It's much too big. And so I went and completely redesigned it in a way that has really helped the players who have used it. So
That's so amazing. And when did you do that? Like, when did you come up with that?
Well, okay. So I was working. So I went through this apprenticeship.
Yes.
And then after the apprenticeship, I went into business with a partner who had also been an apprentice there at this place. And
what was the name of the studio?
Well, okay, the place where we learned was the Hans Weishar studio in Hollywood, and he had two international reputations. One was that he was an absolutely masterful restorer of instruments, and the other one was that he was a 19th century Germanic character who could be impossible to be around, and had no qualms about proving that. And so we stuck it out for 4 years, and nobody regretted the experience. I mean, it was sometimes very difficult, but it was worth every minute of it because so much learning went on.
And you had a German background.
I had a German background, yeah. Although, actually, that didn't really come up that much there. Although several of the people who worked there were German, and so.
But maybe you understood the culture.
Oh, for sure, that part of it, yeah, yeah. So then I opened up a shop, also in the Los Angeles area with my partner. And we did that for 7 or 8 years. But something was really missing for me, selling strings and, this kind of repair work and dealing with what shall I say, just the emotional roller coaster ride of musicians who are forever going through all this stress and the things that happen with performance. And I had to leave for a while. And so I left the West Coast, went back with my wife to Vermont, and had a 50-acre farm for a while where we raised pigs and chickens and geese and turkeys and sheep, and no cows; those were too big. But and tapped the maple trees, made maple syrup, and just completely got away from that. But I had, of course, made lots of friends among musicians in LA. And one of them was a violist of petite physical stature, but of big responsibility in the orchestra. She was the principal player. And she said, "David, I'm not injured yet, but I'm pushing 40 and I can see the handwriting on the wall. And isn't there something you can do? And I made what I think was probably the ultimate understatement of my entire life. I said, well, okay, I can try, but it might look a little different. And that was the beginning. That was back in 1993. That's when that began to happen. So on my farm in Vermont, I began to do these experiments. And she was a principal player in a Canadian symphony at the time. And so I would, okay, this is going to be a little divergent here, but you have to understand. So there's an instrument called a pochette. Pochette is the French word which means pocket. And in the 18th century, dance masters, people who were teaching royalty and so forth how to dance courtly dances, they were not only teaching the motions and the steps and the proper gestures and so forth, but they were the ones who had to provide the music. And so they would teach these steps and say, okay, now we're going to practice with music. And they'd whip this thing out of their pocket. And it was basically a stick with strings on it. It was basically a violin, except you could barely hear it. It didn't sound at all. And it was
I need to play that. It probably doesn't take a lot of talent.
Well, it took some talent to play it. But, no, I know. But the thing was that, he would start to play, or she, probably a he in those days, would start to play and say, oh, no, you have this step wrong. And he'd have to put this thing away to go demonstrate and go grab their arms or whatever. And so it was easy to stick it in this, basically as a holster that he wore. And that's why it was just this one skinny stick. The reason I bring that up is because that's what we started with. Most instrument violin innovation starts with the acoustics. That's the sacred thing. You do the acoustics and then you build the mechanics of the instrument around that. Well, I did exactly the opposite. I said, wait a minute, you guys are not addressing the issue that needs to be addressed here, which is that we're injuring the people who are buying our instruments, buy the instruments that we're selling them. You have to start with the ergonomics, and then you build the acoustics around that. And so with this Canadian player, I would make the equivalent of these pochettes, and I would ship them up to Canada, and she would try them out and give me her critiques about what felt good and what didn't feel good. She'd send it back, and then I'd readjust it and make the changes necessary. And over the course of time, we developed the first of these instruments, at which point I proudly hopped on an airplane, took it up to Canada, with great anticipation during a rehearsal of the symphony orchestra. And the whole string section was gathered around where I was going to open up this case. I opened up the case. There were screams. There were people in shock. There were people in disbelief. Yeah. One ran off the stage. And there were all sorts of comments. And that was the birth of this instrument. And
Screams?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You have to understand the tradition of the violin and the shape of the violin is twice as old as the United States.
I understand.
It is twice as old as the Declaration of Independence. It's 500 and some years old. And this shape has become sacrosanct. And here I was making something that looked like it had been designed by Salvador Dali, right? And it took quite a while for this to be accepted in any way, shape, or form, except for the most avant-garde players who relished something that looked different. And then the ones who tried it and who were really hurting, and then they said, I don't care what it looks like. And what was really interesting, its acceptance into symphony orchestras. The first people to accept it were management of symphonies, because they understood this was a way for them not to have to pay workman's compensation with injured players. They were the first ones. Then the conductors, they didn't care as long as it sounded good.
Right.
Then it was the players of instruments outside of the string sections, woodwind, percussion. They didn't much care one way or the other. Sure, if it works, that's fine. And it was the last ones were, of course, were the violists themselves, for two reasons. First, they didn't like the fact that it looked different. There is this, it's like ballet. Let's say everybody, the tour to whatever this called, the corps de ballet comes on and everybody's doing exactly the same thing in all exactly the same costumes, except for this one dude who's doing something different, and it looks in a completely different costume. And there is something that is abrasive about that. And so they had a point. And so that was the first issue that was objectionable. And the second one was that if they accepted this thing, they were going to have to look at their own injuries and their own denial of the fact that every time they got up and played, it hurt. And so it took a long time.
It is interesting when people have to confront the things that make them uncomfortable, isn't it?
How about that?
That's a very good analogy, isn't it?
That is a perfect one. Yeah. Yeah. None of us like to do that.
Good for you for shining the mirror.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure they'd agree with you, but enough of them did.
You were an early light worker.
Enough of them did. Yeah. And there was that element too, the vibration. So, okay, if I approach this from the light, if I approach this from the sound current, and I know that I am then handing this instrument to someone else who's far more competent to produce sound out of it than I am, and I put that energy into it to begin with, then it will continue to do that. And I was very conscious of that. And
intention.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the intent there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so good. And people say, you put there's so much of yourself into this. How can you stand to be, be departed? And what's the word I'm trying to say? How can you stand to be, give it away? And the answer is really simple. Give it to where the sound is going to produce, where somebody can really produce the sound out of it.
And share it.
And share that. Yeah. And to a whole audience, and sometimes worldwide, at least nationwide, certainly. So.
You are a public servant.
Yeah. In my own way. Yeah. Just trying to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you covered some of my other questions. And we've only talked about your music.
I know.
Okay. So let's see. All right. Let's skip ahead to in the 1960s, you began working with children in mental health.
Right.
What were your greatest lessons in working with children in that capacity?
Oh, my gosh. Greatest lessons. Well, okay. So first of all, I conned my way into the job. So let me.
You are so fun.
This was in an area before there was a national policy in special education in the United States. That did not exist, and so kids with special needs, their needs in education were taken up, rather unevenly by whatever the community had to offer. Mm-hmm. And where I was, it was at an outpatient mental health clinic. Mm-hmm. So I came in there still totally ambivalent. Am I going to go into music? Am I going to go into craft? Am I going to go into this other field, which I was fascinated with, and that was something having to do with how the human brain works. What causes us to tick? How do our minds work? And is there a way to help those who are having difficulty? So I walked to, so there was a school there for kids who, for a variety of reasons, couldn't function in a regular classroom. Right. Mm-hmm. This is basically pre-special ed is what this was about. And so I walked in and I said, well, I'm a musician and I can do some music therapy here. Well, I mean, they were just gaga over that idea. Well, I had no clue. I had no idea what music therapy was or anything. And I think that lasted, they hired me, but I think that lasted all about 2 or 3 weeks. And then I was completely immersed in these extraordinary kids. And you start to read their backgrounds, and some of them just shocking. And the tragedy, but their perseverance and their desire to somehow overcome this. And then the ones that are intensely angry, and the ones whose issues are the result of brain dysfunction. And you're dealing now with mechanics, and so they're the whole emotional issues and the whole mechanical issues. That was a whole new realm for me. And then sort of seeing their parents and trying to gauge what effect the parents had on the kids, and it was a whole new realm for me, one that I found totally absorbing. So that's how I started, and then we were basically teachers in a clinical setting. So there were, of course, lots of staff meetings where we were discussing the kids and learning from those who had more experience what were some of the better ways of what worked. What worked with these kids, what things were successful in moving them forward in whatever small steps or sometimes huge steps that they could make. And so our own education was vital to the clinic. And they encouraged us wherever possible, if there were workshops, if there were summer courses, if there were anything, weekend things that we could do, if there was a mentor we had, to by all means go and participate in those, because it would only assist us in the work that we were doing with the kids. And that's where it all started, because a group of Gestalt therapists came to town one weekend, and I thought, that's a good German word. I know all about German words. Let me go and see what they're into. Most of the psych courses I had taken in college, was still had to do with Freud and Jung and Adler and those all Germanic guys, of course, but still this whole concept that, you have to dig deep into your past and find out, the origins of your problem before you can be healed. Except for one book that I read in college, which was a study by a pair of psychologists named Truex and Kharkov, were their names, where they did it was the beginnings of science and methodical research and testing that went into psychological techniques. And they studied, I don't know how many patients who had been through years of Freudian analysis. And they concluded that not only did it not help, but that you were probably better off if you never did it in the first place. That was an eye-opener. And so when these guys, Gestalt is the German word that means your sense of self and your sense of beingness, your state of being in this particular moment. Mostly what we talk about is the here and now. Who are you here and now? And that's what it takes for you to move forward in your therapy, not digging back into the past. So that was of interest to me after reading Truex and Kharkov. Well, what did these guys have to say? Well, among other things, they're totally into dreams. And that was it. So, and it made so much sense what they were saying. And so that was the beginning of my fascination and preoccupation with dreams. started studying my own dreams, and then just bugged the bejeebies out of my own wife for her dreams and everything. Go away, leave me alone. And then started to bother my friends as I tried to work on some of these techniques. And the whole time reading the works of the founder of the Gestalt therapy technique, who was an irascible German-American psychiatrist named Fritz Perls. And read just about everything he wrote. He was not a nice person particularly. He was abrupt and Germanic, certainly in his own way, but really astute. Such a smart guy. And really understood the workings of not only the brain, but the psyche. And so I read him a lot, and his whole rejection of the things that Freud had been saying. Not that it wasn't a total rejection of Freud, but just some of the silliness. Freud was right about half the time. And maybe none of us can say that we're even as good as he was. But you had to separate the wheat from the chaff. You had to get rid of the stuff that was just complete nonsense. And then find a way to work with the things that were good, that were valid, that he had to suggest. And this guy Perls was one of those who really came forward with some techniques that were extraordinary and revolutionary in their time. And that is what led me to one of the more surprising discoveries in his own works, because he was so focused on just undoing the work that Freud had been adamant was the only way to go, and had been adamant for 50, 60, we're talking the 1960s, Freud was involved, at least 60 or 70 years, had been the accepted approach throughout the industry of psychology. And here comes Fritz Perls and says, you guys are so full of it that it's just not even funny. And you have to completely change your whole technique. That was his main goal. And everything else that he understood and had in the back of his mind as important had to be adjuncts to this. They could not be front and center. And I remember reading in this one book that then became my therapeutic Bible. And if it's all right, I have the book here. I carry this book around because it's just so important. This is Gestalt therapy verbatim. And there's a picture of the guy. I don't know if anybody can see this, but there he is in his own irascible.
The camera's right there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there he is in his own irascible face. But in here, he makes one comment. So this is a book of basically talking about dreams and therapy sessions in which they work on people's dreams. But then sandwiched in between those therapy sessions, there are question and answer periods where people who are in training get to ask Perls questions. And here was the thing that just totally grabbed me. It's one exchange, one question, and a 4-word response. The question is it possible to use an unresolved life situation as if it were a dream and work on it in the same way? In other words, if there's something bugging you in real life, if there is some conflict, if there is some injustice, if there is some event that has completely bowled you over in your life, can you treat that as a dream and work on it the same way you would work on a dream? And here's what Perls has to say. Yeah, just the same. And with that is the beginning and the end of his even acknowledgement of this earth-shaking concept that says, no, there is no difference between your so-called objective existence and your dream world. There is no difference in what goes on in your everyday, ordinary, you think objective, step-by-step, logical life, and the absolute insanity that sometimes is what your dreams are about. They are the same experience. And what that implies about the makeup of life and our relationship to life is earth-shaking. It's absolutely astonishing, because it says, no, your life is not an objective experience of one event after another that makes logical, sequential sense. Something completely different is going on. And it is, in fact, the same as what's going on at nighttime when you're dreaming. That is an amazing, amazing insight on his part. And the more you read between the lines, even of various spiritual masters, they all say the same thing. Look out into the universe and all you're seeing is a mirror of yourself. And that's what a dream is about. Dreams are, in essence, a reflection of your own circumstances in the present moment. Now, they're much more than that. I mean, dreams are incredibly multifaceted, so don't get me wrong. But in terms of the relevance to us as we try to grow, and I mean grow spiritually, as we try to grow and become centered into our own self and our own purposes, what we discover about dreams is that they are constantly talking to us about ourselves. And far from being these illogical and crazy plots and silly circumstances, they are, in fact, the problem is that they are speaking in a slightly different language than we're accustomed to speaking or understanding. And once we understand that language, they make perfect sense. And what Pearls suggested is that the same thing is going on the entire time we are awake as when we are asleep. And that's earth-shaking. That totally changes your life if you begin to be aware of that phenomenon going on.
Okay.
Sorry, that was quite a speech. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. It's just like there's 300 ways I could go with that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So, you've covered a lot of this. I had a bunch of questions about that. And you just explained it all. So, all right. So our dreams are always a metaphor.
Metaphor is the operative word. Yeah. Dreams speak in the language of metaphor. And if you understand that, suddenly their language makes perfect sense. If you don't understand that, their language is complete nonsense. And maybe the best thing to do is offer an example.
Please do.
Okay.
I was going to ask you for examples because then my next question is, so explain Pearl's explanation of how this is happening in my day-to-day, right? Okay,
we will definitely get to that. So let's start with the traditional type of dream one that you have after you go to bed at night and you're fast asleep and your eye motion goes in, rapid eye movement and all that stuff is happening, and there's something going on that bypasses your conscious brain, and it is, in essence, how can I say it? It's an assessment of who you are in any particular given moment. Okay. So I'm going to back up just a little bit and talk about metaphor and how common it is in our own lives. We use metaphors on a daily basis, constantly, because they help us take an abstract concept and bring it into usually a visual field in which we can accept it on a totally gut level, not just a cerebral level. So if I say, that guy's a chicken, that doesn't make any sense at all. And yet we all know, we associate chickens as being the type of animal that would rather flight than fight, right? Go through a flight, literally in the case of a chicken, get away from an adversary rather than take on the adversary and try to defeat it.
Right.
So immediately we think of a chicken, and we can then transfer that into our own human realm. And what we're using is a metaphor. The difference is that when you do that with a dream, or when that statement needs to be made in a dream form, you look at the guy you're thinking about, and suddenly he's got the head of a chicken and some wings. And we go, how bizarre, how stupid is that? And yet, if you translate that into the language of metaphor, you understand perfectly what is being said.
Uh-huh.
So let me give another example.
It's a visual metaphor.
In that case, it's a visual. It doesn't have to be, but
Right.
but most of them are visual. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say that I have a dream in which I see myself in front of a grapevine, right, growing grapes, and I pick it up, and I am given a communication through this vineyard of grapes. And then the scene shifts suddenly to something completely different. And I see my employer's shoes on the floor, and I immediately step into them. Now, if you had that as a dream, you'd go, this is nuts. What, they have the first half of the dream has nothing to do with the second half, and none of it makes any sense at all until you think of it metaphorically, something about having been given a communication through the grapevine and having to step into your boss's shoes.
Right.
Suddenly there is a totally cogent and completely comprehensible message directed specifically to the individual dreamer. And this goes on constantly. And in my dream work, what I really teach is I teach you how to be a translator. I say, okay, this is a different language, and you have to learn this language. And when you learn this language, you're going to discover that it opens up doors that are extraordinary to you. Now, that's the sleeping dream, what I call the sleeping dream, the kind of dream that we all have. And then when we get older and our bodies stop producing melatonin, the dreamer says, well, I can't remember any of my dreams. And that's the point when I say, want to bet? You remember half your dreams because they happen when you're wide awake. Now I'm going to tell you a waking dream experience. Okay. This one actually happened. This is one where I was in Denver, Colorado with a young man, really smart guy, and a friend, who was questioning some of my techniques and questioning some of my, insights, what I thought were my insights into how the dream works and so forth. And so it was a visit, and it was a friendly visit on the one hand. We were really good buddies. At the same time, he was really putting it to me about these dream things, which he was having a hard time buying into. So we were having these very intense discussions. And at the same time, he wanted me to show me the sights of in and around Denver. And that's, of course, right near Pikes Peak, which is this great place where you can go way up this high mountain, and then you get this extraordinary view of everything around it. This was early spring. So we are in the car, and we're going at it verbally, tooth and nail, about, the validity or lack of it. And we're going up this hill, and it's getting a little contentious in the car as we're talking this stuff through. And all of a sudden we come up to this Park Service sign that said, sorry, basically it said the road is closed from here on, that you can't go any further because the snow is still too deep on the mountain. At which point we had to stop the car. And before he turned around, he says, well, okay, you tell me, what does your waking dream have to say about this? And I said, I think it's telling us that the road to see our world from the highest level is definitely there. But at the moment, it's frozen solid and we can't get there. And at that point, it got very quiet in the car. And we turned around and we came back. But that is a metaphor in broad daylight, in waking time, which most people would simply dismiss as not having any relevance. And yet for me was a really important, again, it told me, relax, David, the time isn't there yet. This is going to happen. This is going to come into its moment. And when it does, it will be the right time, but it's not right now. Be patient. And what's really interesting, and now we're talking just weeks ago. So this was something that happened, probably a decade or two ago. And we've maintained this friendship, and it's been wonderful in many realms. But this subject of, metaphysics comes up from time to time. He now is married. He has a daughter who's about 12. And we were having a Zoom session, he and his daughter, because his daughter shares my birthday. And so this is always this fun thing that happens on my birthday. And there he was looking at me somewhat skeptically with his daughter at his side. And she starts talking about her dream life and the experiences that she's having, which are clearly half out-of-body experiences and all kinds of metaphysical things going on. And she's asking questions about it. And I'm thinking, how much am I allowed to say here? So it was, and he adores his daughter. I mean, he's absolutely gaga about her. And it is through her that he is now being opened up. This is where the snow on Pikes Peak is beginning to thaw. And I'm doing my best not to burst out laughing during this session. And so after that, I emailed him and said, I didn't know how much to say. I didn't want to offend you. I know where you're coming from. And he said, no, if she's having these experiences, it's really important to me that she have as much guidance. And it was clear he was totally open to the whole thing. Maybe it wasn't happening to him, but vicariously through his daughter, it was happening. And that was a really, really special moment. But it goes beyond. There's something that I want to say, and maybe you have other questions, and I can come back to it.
You're fine.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. This has to do far more than just showing us our world, because what it does, and this is maybe the most important metaphysical aspect of the whole thing, is it shifts our adversaries to our teachers. They become our teachers rather than our enemies. And this is profound. Because usually waking dreams, the ones that happen in our normal waking lives, they don't have to be nasty experiences. They don't have to be ones where the snow prevents us from going, where they can be fun. The problem is when they're fun, we're enjoying them so much we don't pay any attention to them. And it's usually when we get slapped really hard that if we are open to examining them, those are the ones that we will examine. And so the tendency is to begin by really taking taking on whatever it is out there that's being unjust and unfair to us. And so we create these enemies and we create these monsters in our lives that here we are just trying to mind our own business and go through life. And here come these bad guys into our lives who are making life miserable for us. And the reason they're there is not to give us a hard time, but to wake us up and to cause us to look at something in our lives that is out of balance. That's the only reason they're there. And once they have performed this task, they go away and they leave us alone. And what happens in the interim, if we see that, is it goes from, what are you doing in my life? To, oh my God, thank you. Thank you for giving me this insight. Thank you. Oh, thank you. And then it's beyond, that they're a tool just as much as you're a tool to thank you, whatever it is out there that is constantly moving me around and getting me to be more in tune with my own self. And I'll give you an example of this. And if you interrupt me anytime, I just talk and talk here, but
stop.
But
Keep going.
I'm passionate about this stuff.
I know.
So a few years ago, my wife and I moved to the Oregon coast, bought a fixer-upper, and we were renovating it. And here I am, and here I've been talking for the last however many hours it's been in here about how, I'm beginning to trust this thing that's bigger than me,
Yes.
and that it's the most important thing in my life.
Yes.
And I thought I was trusting it in this project as well. And was well into the project when it came time to go and pick out the various cabinets and appliances for my kitchen. And I knew it was going to be, high. But when I walked out of the store, I was just shocked. It was double what I thought it was going to be. And I was completely taken aback and was beginning to doubt. I set aside all of this, metaphysical stuff that I was so passionately supporting, at least I thought, in myself, and was really in a panic. So getting out of this store, you go into a boulevard that's 4 lanes all in the same direction. And 2 of the lanes are to go straight. One is for a right turn at the next intersection, and one is for a left turn in the next intersection so that you can turn around and make a U-turn on the boulevard a block away that goes to the opposite direction. And that's what we needed. So I'm out there in just a panic, and I pull into that far left lane, getting ready to make a left turn at the intersection. And what should happen coming around the corner going the wrong way in my lane is this car coming straight at me. And my first reaction is, what the hell is going on here? Because, we're headed for a head-on collision. Fortunately, I could see in my mirror and so forth that I had a lane next to me that I could move over to. And so, but I, pushed the button and my window came down because they're going to let this person have it again, the adversary. And it was a woman, went by, she also had her window open and she said, "I am so sorry, I'm totally lost." Those were her words. And I could see in my rearview mirror that the cars behind me had pulled back and allowed her space to make her U-turn within the 4 lanes, and she got herself straightened out and she went on her way. Well, I've been driving, over 50 years, and nothing like that has ever happened to me before. And I said, okay, this is a dream, and I have to look at this dream. So that was the first one. I had 3 dreams in one afternoon. The second one was that my wife and I had rented a motel room at a really lovely area, but it was probably half an hour from where this store was. It was along a river, and it was just beautiful. And so we drove the half hour, 40 minutes there, and we got into the motel room. And I realized I didn't have my checkbook. And all I could think was I left it on the desk with the person with whom we were buying all these appliances. And we were in the middle of this mega store. And was it still there? Had somebody stolen it? I thought, and I told my wife, I have to go back and see if it's still there. So I get in my car, drive back another 40 minutes. So now it's been 80 minutes. And I walk into the store. And of course, the person we were dealing with, she was off. It wasn't her shift anymore. Somebody else was there. But I asked sort of desperately. And they said, well, I don't think she's left the store yet. Let me just call and see. So I'm waiting there frantically. And 5 minutes later, I see her. There's a long hall. It's a huge store. And I see her walking along, and she's holding my checkbook. She comes up and she hands it to me. That was the second one of these dreams, right? This is something so now I had to drive 40 minutes back. So this is now 2 hours I've been in the car while this is going on. Finally, I get back. I'm relieved I have my checkbook. And we said, okay, well, let's go walk along this lovely walkway that's next to the river there. And we're walking along. And there are, of course, a number of unhoused people, to use the modern colloquial statement. Some of them are in better shape than others. But one of them comes along, and he looks at me, and he says, "God bless you, sir." And I thought, oh, that's so beautiful. And I immediately responded, "And God bless you too, sir." And it was at that point I realized I'd been set up. Because he said, "Yeah? What God's going to bless me, huh, sir? What God is going to bless me?" And the decibel level grew and grew. And of course, it was laced with now expletives. What MF God is going to. And so the first thing is, okay, I have to pull my wife back a little bit and make sure that we are safe. But it wasn't about that. It was just this tirade about probably he wasn't quite in his right mind. Mm-hmm. At the same time, there was truth to what he was saying. Look, his life, he had nothing. Mm-hmm. 3 dreams. First, the car going the wrong way in my lane. Second, leaving my checkbook, causing me 2 hours of riding in the car. And then this totally unusual circumstance. I mean, how many people does that happen to? That particular conversation. I said, I have to spend this evening working on these dreams. So here were the dreams. The first one said, again, the understanding that what I'm looking at is me. And that's a really important part of this whole concept of the dreams, is that what you're seeing is a reflection of yourself in the universe. These are all metaphors of you. Mm-hmm. The first one says, my feminine self, meaning my intuitive self, is driving the wrong way and is totally lost. But never fear, there's room for it to turn itself around. Second metaphor says, I am so upset by this that I have left my valuables, those things that I value, vulnerable. And I have not taken care to assure that those things are safe. And I have to go. But it's okay. They are still there for me. And I just have to go and correct that. And the third one is the most extraordinary of all. What God is going to protect me? What God is going to bless me? And if I asked myself that question, which was what this was all about, my answer is so obvious. The same God that's always there. Why would I need to go anywhere else to look for a God that's always there within me? And the message was so clear. You're in a panic, and yet the help is there. The help has never gone away from you. The help is there within you, right within your own self. And so why are you panicked? Why are you having such a hard time about all this when it's right there? So in one afternoon, I got, you're going the wrong way and you need to turn your feminine self around and get going the right way. Quit leaving your valuables and that which you value and is precious to you vulnerable. And just go and rely on the same God that you have always relied on in the past. And suddenly, Andrea, all of these adversarial situations became my teachers. There was never, I was grumpy with a woman who was, driving in my lane the wrong way and said, oh, thank you. And then this whole thing with this checkbook and my having to drive 2 hours, extra is like, thank you for this experience. And then this poor guy, who was so down and out, he was my teacher. I just poured love to him. Thank you. What a gift you gave me. And that is why I love this process so much. It had nothing to do with me being asleep. These were experiences that happened totally while I was awake, totally while I was going about the business of doing what I needed to be doing. And yet there was this learning going on and this connection between me and whatever it is out there that is looking after me. And again, this concept that, somebody's slapped me around. Here I am just trying to live my life and be myself, and they're being mean to me. No, they're not. They are trying to help me if I will allow myself to be helped. Here I am, I'm preaching. It's terrible. I'm not giving you a chance to say anything here, but I'm so passionate.
You have so much to share, though. Why would I interrupt you?
I'm so passionate about all this. And when I teach these classes, and people come to these realizations, and their waking dreams are amazing. Things that happen to people on the freeway at 65, 70 miles an hour, and these cars do these crazy things in front of them. Somehow they're not injured and they're not, they're just mostly shocked and in a panic for a while. And then we work on the dream symbols the same way. And the realizations that they come to, in all facets of their lives. And it's all about healing. It's all about recentering. It's all about coming into your own, understanding your connection with that which is what we're all connected to if we just realize it.
Yeah, I agree. There's there's been so many awakenings in my life. Mm-hmm. But certainly my largest or more recent spiritual awakening, mm-hmm. I got obsessed in angel numbers mm-hmm. and spiritual meanings of animals, right? And I was laughing because you brought up my daughter earlier. Over the weekend, as you know, I was at Brighton Bush, right. which is a hot springs for anyone that isn't aware here in Oregon. And I came home and she said, how was it? And I said, it was fantastic. Like I was on cloud 9 because one, I have a lot of water in my chart. So mm-hmm. I have a lot of Pisces. Mm-hmm. And I just, I was in heaven because I was in like 4 inches of water, laying in the sunshine for 3 hours, getting blasted by heat, right? And most people would think like, you can't sit still, right, for an hour. I'm like, this is amazing.
This is Piscean nirvana is what it is.
It was absolutely Piscean nirvana. So, because, there's only only so much of my body in the water, so I couldn't get too soggy, right? It was perfect. Right. So, and it was warm, and I love being warm. So, she comes over and she's like, fantastic. I was like, the only problem is, and you're going to love this, I'm sure. I got bitten by a horsefly multiple times. There were 6 other people, I won't exaggerate, but at least 6 other people in the tub with me. It was a rather large tub. Didn't bother any of them. Came and bothered me and would not leave me alone. I have at least 6 bites, okay? And I literally was like, get. and it was the silent. What is funny is it was the silent pull. And I was like, stop. And it kept biting me. And it wasn't until I dropped my leg, because I'm notorious for not wanting to kill anything, dropped my leg in the water to protect myself, and it got doused by water. I actually thought it flew away, but it got doused by water. And I saw that and I was like, oh, shit. And, and I scooped it out of the water and put it on the rocks so it could dry off. And I was watching it, and it was like, smoothing out and trying to get the water off of it with its front legs. And I said to it, serves you right, go bother someone else. Okay? And it flew off and left me alone. Okay? There's a waking dream for you.
There's a waking dream. There is indeed.
And I know what I was thinking about at the time, so I'm very interested to hear. A little dream analysis, would you like?
Absolutely, sure. So what we need to do is we need for you to talk, first of all, and you have a little bit already, but tell me about hot springs and spas and so forth. Tell me what, if you were to describe to someone what they were about in your life who had never experienced one before, what would you say about them?
Okay. Unbelievable relaxation.
Okay.
Comfort, warmth, peace, beauty, natural beauty.
Okay, fantastic. So, same question. Tell me about horseflies.
It's so funny because I don't have a lot of experience with them, but my earliest, when I was growing up, we had horses. So I'm sure I've been around them. They've never bitten me up until now. So obviously an annoyance, right? And a pest to another animal or to a human. And they hurt. They sting.
And what are they doing when they're stinging you? What are they doing?
They're biting you.
Yes, and what else? What are they? Why are they biting you?
I had to look it up. They are. I don't know if you know this. They actually, females can't produce their young without human blood. So they take your life force in order to create more life force. Okay,
good. So then, the only. I think you've answered the third one, but let me ask it anyway. Tell me about biting.
Like my experience of it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. The first thing that comes to my mind is my daughter, and I just had a conversation about biting. That's so funny. She was a biter. She bit me when I was on a plane with her, going over to Hawaii. Because she wanted to get off the plane, and I told her we couldn't. She bit other people. I don't know that oh yes, I was. Okay, so early story about me, will be fast. My sister jokes around about this a lot. I don't know how it came about because I was younger than her significantly, 5 years. And we were on the block with some other kids, and she didn't like what another boy was doing or something. I don't know what happened up until that point because I don't remember this. I remember vaguely what happened. And she said, Andrea, sick him. And I bit him and wouldn't let go. And she still laughs because I was like, grrr, grrr. And I got in so much trouble. And she blamed it on me.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's my only real story about biting. What do I think about it now? I mean, in passionate moments, sure. Lightly biting, but yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm a biter now. I usually try to use my words.
Good for you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tell you your spa horsefly story, back to you. But instead of using those words, I'm going to use the ones that you used to describe them. Your job is to listen very carefully. If something really goes to the center of your being, you'll know that it's valid. If something seems more cerebral, maybe not so center to what you're experiencing here. So, Andrea, if this dream were mine, I would say there's a part of me that is experiencing this wonderful, peaceful part of myself. This place that's total relaxation and in the midst of natural beauty. But there's another part of me that's coming along that sort of flies at me out of the blue to pull my life force away from me. It's truly annoying and it hurts. And not only that, it's a representation of something that used to be a big part of me when I was much younger, where I would actually use the same technique in a time of anger. And I would try to hurt facets of myself through an aggressive act, which I now try really hard not to do anymore. So if this dream were mine, I would ask myself, as I go through my life's experiences right now and dealing with the things, and here I have to interject because you and I have talked off camera about some of the things that are going on in your life. As I go through them and I feel this sense of enormous relaxation and peace and love, is there still something in there that comes from a part of my life long ago that is pulling my lifeblood out of me, that is an aggressive part of me that is draining my life energy? And is there a way that I can finally put that to rest? Is any of that ring any bells? Yeah.
Yes.
Funny thing about dreams.
What do I think about them?
Yeah.
I think they're fascinating. Yeah. I don't always remember them. Yeah. I remember them a lot more now. I have several crystals next to my bed to enhance that, right? And I have gridded my bed as well. But I find them fascinating. I mean, I believe everything is a metaphor. Yeah. Everything is meant for us. Yeah. Everything has a message. My interaction with the fact that a butterfly flew by me, it has a message. Everything has a message. Yeah. I'm just not always awake.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay, but keep in mind that this was a waking dream.
I know. Yeah. I mean.
Yeah, right. No, I understand what you mean by awake. Yeah.
I mean, like, la la la, in my own world.
You're paying attention.
Yes,
yes. But even what you said earlier about how, I don't remember my dreams as well, but I put these crystals next to my bed. This was a case where you didn't need any crystals at all.
No.
Because you were wide awake.
Yes.
And that's what's so amazing. Even if we don't remember our sleeping dreams, this is going on all the time,
all day long.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's funny is I wasn't thinking about my divorce at the time, but what you said when you analyzed it, I was like, oh, you are spot on. You are spot on.
Yeah. And it's you who are spot on, because all I did was repeat your words.
I know. I understand. You reflected it back to me as a mirror, but it's still the interpretation or the articulation.
There you go. The articulation. Yeah.
Was spot on.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
But it's you did all the work.
That was amazing. Okay, so I have lots of questions about dreams.
Yeah.
Well, for instance, okay, so I talk about dreams a lot with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
What about when you dream? Okay, so when you dream, this always makes her nuts. I say, so you were you, but you weren't you. And we were in this room, but it wasn't our house. Right. And she's like, what are you even talking about right now?
Right.
It was our house, but it wasn't our house.
Yeah, that's so common.
Do you feel like that's an alternative reality?
Well, it can be. Of course it is. Yeah, absolutely. And that is one way to look at dreams. But here's where people get into a little bit of trouble with this. To me, always the thing that's most relevant to our lives, let's put it that way, in our dreams is that we're looking at ourselves. And it is really easy to ignore that and take some little egotistical fantasy off somewhere else. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. So here's the one I get a lot.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. Well, I had this dream in which such and such happened. And the week later, I was wide awake, and it did happen. It happened in my real life. And then you go into this whole thing about, I had a cognitive dream. I had a one that was predicted the future. I must have special abilities. And I always shoot it down as gently as I possibly can. And I say, what you had was a dream that came to you while you were asleep. And then you had exactly the same dream that came to you while you were wide awake. And maybe if you paid attention to the sleeping one, it wouldn't have to happen twice. And they don't always like to hear that, but it's the same thing. I was involved quite a bit with lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Lucid dreamers.
I was going to ask you about that too.
Okay.
I didn't even know. Okay. I do know what the concept of lucid dreaming is, but I literally read about it in preparation for this. And I was like, I do this all the time.
Yeah. And so
I didn't know that's what lucid dreaming was, but I've been doing it since I was a kid. Yeah. I always am in the middle of the dream. I'm like, this is dumb. And then I wake up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's lucid dreaming. And what happened, so I would go to these seminars with lucid dreamers, and it always devolves into the same thing, which is technique. Well, okay, so I'm flying along in my lucid dreaming, but then I'm starting to descend and I come down to earth. And what are the techniques you use to keep yourself flying? And always I want to, hey, dude, would you just look at the metaphor that you're flying along and suddenly you're starting to descend? What is that telling you about your own life and your own experience? Pay a little attention to that. And the next time, whether you're in a lucid dream or whether you're, having a prophetic dream, that was the word that I was trying to get to earlier, you will see what's going on, and it will straighten out the situation that prophetic dream or that lucid dream is trying to talk to you about. So this is a long way around, Andrea, answering your thing about, well, okay, what, if it's your house, but it's not your house. Absolutely. How many dimensions are we simultaneously existing in? Infinite number. So the point is, what's important there? The fact that you have tuned into one of your other existences, or the fact that existence has tuned into you in this existence to offer you some message that it wants you to tell you about yourself. That's the same thing that comes with past life. I mean, I get this all the time. Well, in my dream, I was this, this gladiator, in Roman times, or I would, I was Julius Caesar. You get all that kind of stuff all the time. So my reply is, oh, so you believe in multiple incarnations? Oh, well, yes, of course. So how many do you think you've had? Well, probably hundreds, maybe thousands. Okay, if you've had thousands of incarnations, why did that one specific one come to you right now, in this lifetime, in this moment? That's what's important about this. Not that you had it. The fact that even if you were dealing back in that life with the particular issue that was in that dream, the fact that it came now, guess what that's telling you? You haven't finished dealing with that right now. It's relevant now in this moment. And that's what's the most important thing about it. So, since you've been carrying around this issue since you were a Roman back 2,000 years ago, don't you think it's about time that you dealt with this and put this whole thing to rest? It always comes back to Gestalt, this wonderful German word. What are you dealing with here and now? It doesn't matter where it comes from. if it's prophetic, it doesn't matter. People have dreams of their futures, living in these incredibly futuristic situations. As you know, Andrea, when we go on the other side, time doesn't make any difference. You can be in the future, you can be in the past, you can be in some completely other world that is almost incomprehensible to us now. But the fact that it's in your consciousness at this moment means it has relevance to this moment. And ultimately, that's what you're trying to deal with.
And that's what you're trying to learn.
And that's the bottom line. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Do you have a common experience that people come to you over and over again for dreams?
Well, I would say there are some dreams that are really common. That for sure.
Like being naked in front of a classroom and doing a presentation.
That's a big one. Yeah, no, that's a big one. Or you're driving down the freeway and you've forgotten how to drive. That's a very or that you're on stage in front of 10,000 people and you forgot your lines. Those are very common. Another very common one is you're flying and suddenly you don't know how to fly anymore and you start crashing. Or another one is where you on a completely different vein, a very positive one, are the ones who are drowning underwater and they start breathing and realize they can breathe underwater. That's such a beautiful dream because water being the unconscious or the superconscious, it can be even, and suddenly you realize that in this realm you're fine. You do have the life force there too, and that's all. I always love those dreams. But yeah, those are very common themes. Oh yeah, and at the violin shop this morning, they said, "Well, why are you here in Portland?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be talking about dreams." So then all of a sudden they had to tell me all their dreams. That always happens. And let's see, what was the dream? Oh, yeah, there was a dream. One guy said, "Well, I used to dream a lot about baseball because that was when I was a kid and I was playing baseball. Now I play golf and I'm dreaming a lot about golf." And I say, "Yeah, your dreams will use the imagery of your current life more than anything else. And trust me, they can make a metaphor out of anything. Your dream imagery will be mostly what you're experiencing in this life, in this moment. Partly because the dream isn't a dream when you're having it at nighttime only. It's during the daytime. So you have that same imagery at nighttime and during the daytime. It's all one. It's all connected. It's all connected. It is indeed.
Mm-hmm. You're just awake sometimes and asleep others.
That's right. Yeah. And as many indigenous cultures will tell you, when you're asleep, that's when you're really awake. And when you're awake, that's really pretty much when you're asleep.
It's true.
So unless you're awake to the fact that it's metaphor.
Uh-huh. Well, you certainly have broken the code on that.
Well, a piece of it anyway. Boy, I think there's a whole lot more. I mean, okay, so I'll tell you. So, as you know, we go to psychic fairs,
yes,
right? And that's where we
That's where we met.
That's where we met. You and I met at a psychic fair, and that's where we go and we try to tune people into it, present what we do to other people. And I was at a huge fair of all places, Arkansas. If you can imagine, you don't think usually of a red state to that degree of being metaphysical, but boy, were they ever. Huntsville, Arkansas. And it was the place where the publisher of my book was, and they were the ones sponsoring. They're totally into metaphysical stuff. And they had their but several psychics of world renown. And so people were coming to me with their dreams, and I was doing not only sleeping dreams, but waking dreams. And I did one that was rather involved for a woman. And she was totally blown away by the experience, but it was so new to her and so unusual to anything she'd heard of before that she also had an appointment with her favorite psychic, I guess, who came from Australia. I mean, some really big wig in that particular field. And she was telling me this afterwards. She explained this to him, and she said, well, now, is he right? And his first reaction was, yes, 100%. Yes, absolutely 100%. And then he sort of got this faraway look, as you as a psychic know. And he went and he said, 10%. And I was so, what shall I say, miffed, I guess it was, my nose was totally bent out of shape here. Well, how can the guy say, I had this 100% and then tell me it was only 10%? And it took me a couple of years to understand what he was telling me, which is, yes, as far as I took that thing, I was right on. I was, as you pointed to your own nose, I was dead on as much as I knew. But probably if I got 10% of what dreams have to tell us, that would have been amazing. Probably was more like 0.5%. And that's the thing. Again, how much do we know? We don't know very much at all.
No, your ego was 100% is
That's
what
right.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Ego's 100%. That's right. And so what we're trying to do is, as much as possible, get out of the way. And surrender this whole thing and just watch what transpires. It's so exciting. It's so amazing. It's so far beyond anything we could conceive of or engineer on our own. It's truly, it's just magnificent. I mean, like those 3 waking dreams, this nutty guy coming along. What motherfucker? God is going to bless me. Who could have invented that? Who could have thought that through? And here he was teaching me. All you can do is be humble. What a magnificent lesson. And how, imagine, I mean, they've got a sense of humor. I mean,
yes.
What a magnificent way to bring that to my attention.
Yeah. Everything's a lesson.
Yeah, everything's a lesson. And yeah, if I got 0.5%, I'll be proud. That'll be my egotistical moment if I have even that much.
This isn't your first time here.
No, it is. For sure it is not.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No, I've been hammered before. I'll get hammered
You have
again.
way too many gifts for this to be your first rodeo. Okay, let's see. We were going to talk about love.
Okay. Yeah.
Love specific in relationships to dreams. Yeah. And you were talking, at least when we were chatting offline here, you were talking about how the deeper you go into dream work, the more you recognize.
It's all about love.
Yeah.
And again, what you mean by love, and that's, of course, really important to specify, because we're not talking about a romantic pull. Right? We're not talking about, across a crowd. That's not what this is about at all. It's about the recognition that everything I see out there is God and needs to be treated that way. And it's the respect that comes of that knowledge. And so, yeah, look what happened again with those 3 moments, the driver of the car going the wrong way, and then the wallet, the checkbook left, and then this crazy guy. And all of a sudden, all the adversity involved with that evolved into gratitude. It was just total, oh my God, look, oh my God, literally. I mean, look what was done for me in order, through these tools,
to gain my attention.
To bring me insight. What can you do but send love back? What can you do but say, thank you, gratitude, thank you. So that brings me to the one thing that is the newest part of my work with the dream.
Yeah.
Which is what I call the proactive work with the dream. Why am I sitting around waiting for a slap? Why do I have to sit here and be unconscious, waiting for some unpleasant incident in my life? Is it possible to preempt it through a different way of being? And this has come up This is right at the beginning of our conversation here online. In this work with this small community where I live on the coast, where I'm doing civic work, I'm doing library work. And there are all these little fiefdoms and all of these, people who with their egos invested here and there. And it's, boy, at times it's contentious. So I say, okay, these are all me. These are all facets of myself. How can I deal with this? And I say, if I go in there having put myself in as neutral and is in a space of total surrender to that which works through me, what will happen? I believe they will have to reflect that state. I believe if I go in there totally as egoless as I possibly can be, with as much love being projected, they don't have to know that, but just project it silently to them. What will happen to our interactions? And I will tell you this, I've been doing it 4 years now, and the entire government is in disarray and has been for 4 years, with the exception of the library. And the library is about ready to break ground on $1 million plus expansion. And there is a teamwork that's going on. And I just look around and I go, there were people who made bets that this would never happen. And they are coming now back to me with their heads down. It's all a joke anyway. We're having a good time, but they are in it. Beyond the joke, there is this curiosity. What the hell has he got going?
How did he make this happen?
Yeah. And what I want to tell him is I'm not. I keep giving it away. If I were trying to do this myself, I would be in as bad a shape as every other single element of this civic organization here. But every time I have a meeting, every morning I try, as I wake up and I'm lying in bed before I get up, give it away, give it away, give it away, give it back to them. They do this so much better. Before I go into a meeting, it's okay. So it was Kabir, I think it was Kabir, who said, it was either Kabir or Rumi, maybe it was Rumi, who said, I am the hole in the flute that the breath of the Christ flows through. That is such a profound statement. He didn't necessarily mean Jesus. He meant the Christ consciousness.
Yes.
I am the hole in the flute that the breath of the Christ consciousness flows through.
Yeah.
I try to say that at least once every day. Get the hell out of the way and let this thing happen. And so we are the gophers. So it's actually a bit of a paradox. We have to sit there and I have a meeting coming up and these are the issues on the table. I have to prepare to make sure that I have this all in alignment because I'm going to preside over this meeting and I better know what's going on. Boom, 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 boom. And I do all my homework. And then just before I go into the meeting, I totally give it away. And I know that stuff's there if I need it. And sometimes I go into the meeting and it's practically word for word what I've done because clearly that was the best way to do it. But I go in there and more than every once in a while, this thing takes off in its own direction. I'm just left speechless. And it is always 10 times better than anything I thought. Always ends up with some kind of resolution that I never would have dreamed of. Sometimes the whole issue is out the window because something came along, boom, and took care of it in a way that I didn't even know was possible to have it be. And that's that whole thing, the surrender. I don't know if you're familiar with Ho'oponopono.
Yes.
Okay. So this is what that's all about. Mm-hmm. The four things that they say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. Right. So I've added a little bit to those phrases just for my own self, but I found it very helpful because it helps focus. So for the I'm sorry, I'm sorry for my interference. Please forgive me. Thank you for this opportunity to heal through surrender and to do so with love. Now, adding those two phrases just focuses that so much for me. And that's what I do. Again, it's the same thing as the Rumi. I am the hole in the flute. Get the hell out of the way as much as I can. It's so much more exciting. It's so much more fun. They keep coming at you thinking you're the one doing it. I mean, it's such an ego trip if you let it be, and you have to slap yourself a little bit to say, no, you're not doing it. Get that out of there, because then they're really going to punch you. If you know about that, they're going to kick your butt from here to whatever if you try to take credit for it. But it's so exciting, and it's so beautiful. It's so humbling. It just takes your breath away sometimes. To watch this thing go on. And so if I can be that much a channel, if I can assist that much, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's just extraordinary to behold.
How do you feel we can incorporate more love for ourselves and more love for the world?
Well, it has to start. Okay, well, for sure, the understanding that if you give that love out there, it's going to come back to you. I mean, that has to happen. If what you are seeing out there is a reflection of yourself, and you pour that love out to those metaphorical elements of yourself that you see out there, you're giving it to yourself. And that's the paradox. You're giving it away and it's coming back to you. That's what that's all about. So here's a statement, from the Bible, and the lion shall lay down with the lamb, right? And I never understood that until I understood that the contentious nature, and we see this all the time, by the way, at the coast, these beautiful orcas going after these baby whales, and tearing them to bits, or, there is so much violence even under that beautiful smooth surface of water. It's a battleground in there. And I understand that this is a reflection of the battles that go on within us. That if we raise our consciousness, if we can raise our consciousness above that, the lion will indeed physically, literally lie down with the lamb. That's what that's about. And it's about an expanded consciousness. It's about this giving the love away. Give it away. Give it away. Give it as much as you possibly can, because that's when it's transformed. That's when you transform. That's when you act as a channel for the transforming of it. It's not even what you do, it's who you are. That's what matters. It's not, I'm going to go out and I'm going to I'm going to go out for, fight for, women's rights, or I'm going to fight for minority rights, or I'm going to fight for, the lesbian community, or, it doesn't matter. You can do all those things, and you can do them beautifully, and that's wonderful. You can also sit there and pick the weeds out of your garden quietly without ever talking to anyone. And as long as you're doing it from that state of consciousness, you are being an equal channel. You can be at home and making dinner. You can, if you create a meal with love, it's the same as going out on a picket line and fighting for a constitutional amendment or whatever. And I'm not knocking any of that stuff. It's all beautiful. It's all wonderful. But the point is, it's not what you do. It's who you become and the attitude with which you go at all of these things. And that's what's been such a delight for me in doing this civic work, is to see, that really works. I don't have to wait to get punched. Again, metaphorically punched. I can create it as I go along. And that, I think, is the space it wants us to be in anyway, as much as we possibly can. So I keep trying to do it.
Me too. I know.
Think it's time to stop here. The lights went out.
I wish everyone who is listening could see the sparkle in your eyes when you speak.
Well, you have some pretty nice sparkle yourself, by the way, coming right at me.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. And thank you so much for your time today. And thank you so much for your passion and your insight.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. Boy, my goodness, I just jabbered on for hours here, but
That's great. I'm glad you were inspired.
good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your generosity.
And thank you for your love.
You're welcome.